Welcome to part two of our series around financial decision making. So in our last little snippet, we heard all about the prompts for thinking behind investing in irrigation, and James shared some of his steps involved in the decision making. Just a reminder, this is part of the Water Use Efficiency Project delivered by Pinion Advisory on behalf of the TasFarm Innovation Hub, and it's made possible due to funding from the Australian Government's Future Drought Fund. So James, thanks for jumping back into part two. I believe we're about to hear a little bit more about enterprise level decision making.
Absolutely, Joe. All fun things here. So as you said, taking that whole of business approach to start with is really important, and then moving into how we actually go about investing in irrigation and assessing the needs and options that are available to us. So assessing the need is really around some questions that we might be asking. I'm not sure, Joe, you might sort of come across these yourselves, but some of the things that might be whirling around their heads are, would investing in irrigation improve overall profitability? Again, it's a great consideration, and what we said in the first stage was never discount an opportunity without doing some homework first. What enterprises could I use if I had irrigation? So if we've been typically dry land and we're investing in irrigation infrastructure, what could that bring and how could that grow our business and also skill set? Would they work better on my farm than my current enterprises? Would it give me more secure production and better cash flow as a result? And I think another one that's in there is if I don't invest in water now, will I be able to later? Water is an appreciating item or should be over time. So it's certainly one of those considerations around the actual market. And then what value does irrigation add to my property now and in the future? So all really valid questions and some that are well worth asking.
Certainly some questions that we would be seeing producers asking themselves, James, particularly with the Tasmanian Irrigation Scheme rollout and the opportunity of water and irrigation activity coming to new areas around Tasmania.
Yeah, absolutely. So some of the things that we could be asking as well are then starting to dig a little bit deeper, using that framework that we discussed in stage one, but asking some key questions around, does this fit my business and personal goals? The two should come together, particularly in a family farm environment. Does it complement or detract from core business? And we were talking about diversification not necessarily being a reduction in risk. Sometimes when done poorly, it can actually increase the risk that we've got in business. How much area could we convert from dry land? And we've also got to remember things like storage and farm water access plans are all part of that. What other benefits could this bring, such as more secure fodder? Does it bring better margins? Again, starting to pick up that discussion. And does it match up to the marketing environment and complement our strategy too? So particularly where we've got multi-enterprise differences, where we come away from perhaps some more commoditized enterprises with big markets, we might start becoming a bit more niche in this case. Niche markets can be quite tricky if we don't have the supporting marketing structure and available buyers. Some of the things that flow from that is potential third-party credit risk up to just actually having to store stuff on farm until they're ready to take it. Do we have the resources to do this? So again, we want to be opportunistic first. So always do the numbers, see what it does. And if the opportunity is good enough, we should, in theory, be able to resource around it. Again, that's not always possible though. So it is a consideration around the resources to do it. And some of that resource could actually be your own management ability and management skill to bring this together. And if we say yes to this, what do we potentially say no to? And that's a really powerful question that I use on a personal level, Joe. I'm not sure about you, but it's certainly quite a big question to go. Some things, if we're going to say yes to this, how do we make it work? And what are some of the things we might actually be saying no to? So to step out how we'd start doing some of the numbers, we're going to run a bit of a case study and follow that case study through. So again, the numbers we've used are just indicative numbers only, so they're not to be used for your own decision making. They are purely there to step it out and show you the process that we should take when making capital enterprise level decisions. But let's assume that we've got dry land and we've got a grazing beef herd at the moment. And then option 2, we're thinking about moving to irrigated pivot. So some of the considerations here is diversification in enterprise mix. Is it adding irrigated fodder to a livestock enterprise? Does it include crop? What sort of enterprise? How intensive are we? What's our rotation length? So if we're with potatoes, we've potentially got a 6-year rotation. So we can't just base things off one particular high value crop. We want to think about water access. If we're making these changes at the enterprise level, how much water does that particular crop need? Or particular crop, pasture, whatever it may be, and then how much have we actually got available to us? What are some of the machinery and infrastructure requirements that we might have or need? So do we have access to contractors, particularly for higher value niche crops? Will also come with some quite different machinery requirements, particularly if we're moving, in this case, from our status quo and moving into perhaps more intensified crop types. We're going to want to think about some of the additional capital that's going to have to come with that, or how we bridge that gap of capital. Does activity equal profitability? Again, another really key one. So we can be quite busy, but if we're busy with lots and lots of different things, do we know what our core business is and what we're fundamentally really, really good at? And so by adding these extra things and stretching that management ability, we put ourselves at risk of eroding profitability. People and management is a really key primary profit driver in the difference between high performance farms. Does diversity reduce risk or increase risk is again another big consideration. So for our case study, let's assume we're investigating a 50-hectare pivot and we want to include some high value crops. So we're going to want to look at our current gross margin and what we think our forecast gross margins are going to be, and then start thinking through some of the capital costs associated with that. Before we go on, gross margins are something that we can knock out quite quickly. What they're really good for is comparing across different enterprises on a dollar for dollar or dollar per hectare, dollar per DSE perspective. So it brings it into an apples with apples type comparison. It's great for comparing how each one stacks up against another, or looking at what we could potentially bring in. It's a combination of looking at yield by price, or if it's stocking rate, turn off weight by inventory. Those things make up our income. So for a cropping situation, it's going to be yield by price, which is going to create that total income. In this case, we're talking per hectare. And then that top income line is going to start taking away some of the direct costs that go with that, also known as variables that go into creating that income. So things like seed, fertilizer, chemicals and sprays, any contract work that might be required with that. So it's going to minus that off. And so total income minus our total variable costs will give us our gross margin. So to give you a bit of an idea, if you go to the NRE website, they have some templates on the gross margin tools for a number of different enterprise types.
Thanks, James. Yeah, there's a huge suite of gross margin tools appropriate for Tasmania on the NRE website. And these seem to get updated every couple of years. So it's just important to fact check the numbers behind those tools if they haven't been updated in the last little while.
Absolutely. Yeah. And then being able to overlay that. So they're great for indicative information, and you want to be able to overlay that with yield forecasts or income forecasts that are suited to your specific area or farm. And you're also going to want to update that with any pricing changes in that time frame. So let's assume our current dryland grazing is generating $750 per hectare, or off that 50 hectares, $37,500 per year on average. Our forecast weighted average for irrigation is then going to be somewhere around $2,800 per hectare. Or if we're going to break it down into our most limiting resource, you can then break that down into the average dollars per megalitre as well. So in this case, we've got a 6-year rotation between barley, grass seed, peas, poppies, potatoes for processing, and wheat. Potatoes are clearly the highest value margin per hectare in this case, but we can only grow them one in 6 years if we're following agronomic best practice. And so what we're going to want to do there is look at the weighted average across gross margins. So that it's not just taking the 7.5. We want to be picking up things that are also going to be part of the rotation across that period as well, that are going to be less than that. So in this case, we've got $140,000 per annum being generated versus what we're currently doing on that particular piece of land at $37,500. Again, really important, these are not budget numbers to use. You must do this on an individual level. So this 140,000 minus the 37.5 is going to give us a net benefit in this case of $102,000 per annum at the gross margin level. Then what we want to start doing is looking at the capital cost of setup. So some of the initial costs are actually the water allocation or water right. So in this case, we've valued 50 hectares with 5 megalitres per hectare at $1,600 per megalitre, or $400,000. We want to consider some design and planning approvals. In this case, we've allocated 10,000. And if we need dams and dam construction, well, then we're going to want to consider that. So, you know, are we feeding direct off a system and scheme, or do we have to actually store some water on farm ourselves? What's the power supply to the site? Do we have power already coming to a particular site? Are we going to need to add some? Again, it's quite an expensive cost to start moving power poles or digging trenches. So in this case, we've sort of said that's $45,000. We also need a pump station too. So $60,000 been allocated here. Again, 20-year life. We've got a salvage value of 50,000. And the salvage value is really important for when we're talking about stage 3. The actual irrigator or pivot in this case, we've said has a 25-year lifespan and will be $195,000. And mainline and other infrastructure will be $40,000. And then we've also got to assume interest too. So interest is an interesting one. We'll assume it's debt funded in this case, but if it's not, and we're in a lucky position that we can do this out of cash, we also want to still attribute an interest cost to this because it's an opportunity cost of what we could have done with that money as well. So whilst that may not exist on a cash flow perspective, it's well worth accounting for when we think about how it's going to line up against the other options we could do with that available cash. So once we've gone through gross margin analysis, which is widely done, some of the things that we can do is then looking at partial budgets. Partial budgets are really great at trying to line up what we think the additional costs are going to be versus the gains that we're expecting. And this creates a depth of thinking. Partial budgets can be done really quick back of the envelope. So, let's just assume that we've got a hay versus grain type calculation to make. A same sort of thing, we're going to want to assess what are some of the costs that we're going to incur, what are some of the gains, how does that work out? So we can do a quick back of the envelope on those things. That's a partial budget. In terms of a capital item, also equally useful to start getting that depth of thinking around. So on the losses side, what new costs occur in this case is going to be the capital costs on an annualized basis. So that's $4,300 per year. That's everything across the lifespan of that infrastructure. The interest component here, again, the interest makes up quite a reasonable chunk of the capital costs that go into this. So that's $45,000 a year. And then we've also got the pumping costs here of just under $40,000. And that's going to include things like electricity, labor, meter usage, water costs, maintenance, and the like. So that's all to be accounted for in the new losses that come with. What costs no longer occur? So this would line up on the gain side of things. We haven't added anything here, but this is one that could be a really good key critical thinking piece to go, what are some of the things that this could bring that means that we can, shore up gaps, and so take away some of the costs that we might occur without irrigation too. So lower bottom end yields, can we shore these things up? Is that the cost that's saved perhaps? So we can start thinking through those things. What I'd say about that particular segment is don't get carried away and make sure your assumptions are robust, because that is one area that could really blow this out and we start getting that confirmation bias flowing through. So just be really careful, get some assistance with double checking your assumptions and making sure that they're realistic and grounded. If they then go to what income's foregone, which lines up on the losses side, we've got the loss of the previous enterprise, which is the grazing benefit. So the $750 per hectare by 50 hectares. We also want to account for that because we'll be moving to a new enterprise. So there's $37,500 there that we're not getting from that particular enterprise going forward. On the flip side of that, though, we've got the new income that's derived, which is $180,000, which is the $140,000 gross margin, adding back in the pumping costs because we've added that as a loss. So it's we're adding them back in. So we've got a $180,000 benefit in this case. So our total losses on the partial budget are 120, just shy of 127,000, and our gains are around 180,000. So we've got a net benefit there that says we can start using that to forecast out what our return might be. So that net benefit is 53,200 per year. So some takeouts from this particular stage are that it's important to assess any and all potential opportunities on their own individual merit. And you must apply critical thinking to help that depth that's needed to create the best outcome. And the outcome there could be that it's best to do nothing, and that's okay too. Conducting an enterprise gross margin analysis will tell you how new or potential enterprises interact with your business and if they add value. And then the goal of any innovation is to make profitable use of resources, have sufficient cash to meet needs, and increase net worth over time within a risk profile that's acceptable to you and your business. And I think it's really important to think about getting help in grounding assumptions and using the tools that are on that website that Joe mentioned before to help further create the depth of thinking.
Thanks, James. It's stepping through those steps, you can really see that no two businesses are going to be the same. And so that one size fits all approach really isn't going to be helpful for this type of thinking.
Yeah, absolutely. Very unique approach, Joe, and a great observation. So it's really important to look at, your own situation first.